My daughter-in-law tapped the line above my name. Sign tonight, and we'll make sure you have a room in the new place. Refuse, and I can't promise there'll be space for you. My son stood behind her and said nothing. I was 69 years old. The contract on my kitchen table was for the sale of the home my husband, Walter, and I had built 40 years earlier outside Columbus, Ohio. I looked at my son. Daniel, what is this? He rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, we already accepted an offer. The words hit harder than my daughter-in-law's threat. They had listed my home. They had shown it to strangers. They had chosen a buyer. And they had done all of it without telling me. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, pushed a pen across the table. The house is too much for you now, she said. The stairs. The yard. The repairs. This is the sensible choice. I looked down at the paperwork. The sale price was $612,000. The closing date was 18 days away. A section near the bottom said the property would be delivered vacant. Vacant. As though I were not sitting inside it. As though 40 years of birthdays, Sunday dinners, and Christmas mornings could be cleared out before closing. Daniel finally spoke. We found a place closer to the city. It has 3 bedrooms. Melissa folded her arms. 1 room for us. 1 for the kids. And 1 that could be yours, depending on how this goes. Depending on how this goes. I stared at my son. He looked away. That was when I understood. This was not a conversation about helping me. It was pressure. They needed my signature because something about their sale was not complete. I picked up the pen. Melissa smiled. Daniel exhaled. Then I set the pen back down. My glasses are upstairs, I said. I'm not signing anything I can't read. Melissa's smile disappeared. You can read it tomorrow. I'll read it tonight. I gathered every page before she could stop me and carried the contract upstairs. Inside my bedroom, I locked the door. Then I photographed each page with my phone. When I reached the final sheet, I noticed something strange. The seller information listed 2 names. Mine. And Daniel's. But Daniel had never owned this house. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and removed an old brass key from beneath Walter's folded handkerchiefs. He had given it to me 3 weeks before he passed away. If anyone ever tries to rush you out of this house, he had said, open the safe before you answer them. Until that night, I had never needed to. Hello, my friends. I'm Eleanor Brooks. Subscribe and stay with me, because what Margaret found inside her husband's old safe changed who had the right to decide the future of that home. Margaret waited until the house became quiet. Daniel and Melissa were staying in the guest room that night. They said it was easier than driving home after such an important family decision. Margaret knew the real reason. They wanted the signed contract before morning. At 11:30, she carried the brass key down to Walter's workshop in the basement. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. His tools hung above the workbench in careful rows. The old steel safe sat beneath a canvas drop cloth in the corner. Margaret pulled the cloth away. Her hands trembled once. Then she steadied them. The key fit the lower lock. Walter's birthday opened the combination. Inside were 3 folders, a small velvet box, and an envelope with Margaret's name written across the front. She opened the first folder. The original property deed rested inside a clear protective sleeve. Margaret read the ownership line twice. Margaret Elaine Carter. Sole owner. Daniel's name did not appear anywhere. Neither did Melissa's. The second folder held tax records and a title insurance policy. The third contained a letter from Walter. Margaret unfolded it carefully. He had written it 4 months before he passed away. The house is yours alone, he wrote. I made that change because I never wanted anyone to confuse being your child with owning your future. Margaret pressed the paper against the workbench. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice. Then footsteps moved across the kitchen floor above her. Melissa was speaking. Margaret could not hear every word. But she heard enough. Our financing deadline is Friday. Daniel answered more quietly. What if she calls someone? She won't, Melissa said. She still thinks this is about the stairs. Margaret photographed every page inside the safe. Then she placed the originals in a canvas document pouch Walter had kept behind the folders. Before closing the safe, she left the tax copies inside. Nothing that proved ownership. Just enough to make it appear untouched. Back upstairs, Margaret opened the contract again. This time, she noticed a reference on page 7. Seller authorization attached. There was no attached page in the packet Melissa had given her. Margaret searched the county property website. The public record still listed her as the only owner. But the house was already marked as pending on a private real estate portal. Someone had moved forward without her. At 12:08, Daniel sent her a message. The buyer's representative will be here at 8. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Margaret did not reply. She saved the message. Then she called the emergency number printed on Walter's title policy. A recorded voice answered. Margaret left her name, address, and one sentence. My son is trying to sell my house using an authorization I never signed. A few minutes later, the company's on-call fraud specialist returned her message. Her name was Rachel Monroe. After hearing the contract number, she became very quiet. Mrs. Carter, she said, your signature is already on a power of attorney form in our file. Margaret gripped the phone more tightly. I never signed a power of attorney. The title specialist introduced herself as Rachel Monroe. Her voice remained calm. The form gives Daniel Carter authority to sell the property on your behalf. When was it filed? 6 weeks ago. Margaret sat down on the edge of her bed. 6 weeks earlier, Daniel and Melissa had taken her to lunch for her birthday. Melissa had brought a folder of papers. She said they were updating Margaret's emergency contacts and medical information. Margaret had signed 2 forms that afternoon. But she had never signed away control of her home. Can you send me a copy? Margaret asked. I can send it to the email address in the file. Margaret gave Rachel her address. A moment later, the document arrived. Her name appeared at the top. Her signature appeared at the bottom. It looked close enough to fool a stranger. But Margaret immediately saw the mistake. She always signed her middle initial. Margaret E. Carter. The document said Margaret Carter. No initial. No careful loop beneath the final letter. Walter used to tease her about that loop. He said it looked like a tiny porch swing. This signature had no porch swing. Rachel continued. The form was notarized. By whom? A mobile notary named Pamela Reeves. Margaret wrote the name on a yellow notepad. Can you stop the sale? I can place an internal warning on the file tonight. But the closing company may need a formal fraud affidavit before they freeze everything. Then send me whatever I need. Rachel emailed 3 forms. Margaret completed them at the small desk beside her bedroom window. She attached photographs of the original deed, Walter's letter, and her driver's license. Then she added Daniel's message demanding that she sign by morning. Before pressing send, Margaret heard voices in the hallway. Melissa whispered first. She has the papers. Daniel answered, she won't understand them. Margaret looked at the forged authorization on her screen. Her son believed age had made her easy to manage. Melissa believed fear would make her obedient. Neither of them understood what Walter had taught her during 40 years of marriage. Never argue when documents can speak for you. Margaret sent the affidavit. Rachel confirmed receipt. The file is now under review, she said. Do not sign anything tomorrow. And do not give them the original deed. Margaret placed the documents inside Walter's canvas pouch. Then she hid it behind the loose baseboard beneath her dresser. At 7:40 the next morning, Melissa knocked on the bedroom door. The buyer's representative is here. Margaret opened the door wearing her best navy dress. Daniel stood behind Melissa. Beside him was a man carrying a leather briefcase. Margaret looked at the contract in his hand. Then she noticed the notary stamp on the top page. Pamela Reeves. The same woman who had supposedly witnessed Margaret sign 6 weeks earlier was standing downstairs, waiting to watch her sign again. Margaret walked downstairs slowly. She wanted everyone to see that she was steady. Pamela Reeves sat at the kitchen table beside a man in a charcoal suit. A leather briefcase rested near his chair. Daniel introduced him as Eric Lawson, the buyer's representative. Pamela avoided Margaret's eyes. Margaret placed the unsigned contract on the table. Then she looked directly at the notary. "Have we met before?" Pamela glanced at Melissa. "Not exactly." Margaret waited. Pamela cleared her throat. "I handled a remote acknowledgement 6 weeks ago. Did you see my face?" The identification was submitted through the remote platform. The camera froze more than once during the acknowledgement. "Did you hear me say I was giving Daniel control of my house?" Pamela looked down at her stamp. "I verified the documents that were provided." "By Daniel?" No one answered. Eric Lawson shifted in his chair. "Mrs. Carter, I was told the authority had already been confirmed by the title company." Margaret turned toward him. "What else were you told?" Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, this is unnecessary." Margaret did not look at him. Eric opened his briefcase and removed a thin file. He spoke carefully. "I was told you had agreed to move after closing because maintaining the property had become difficult." "Move where?" Eric hesitated. Melissa answered. "With us, if everything goes smoothly." Margaret looked at the file in Eric's hand. A printed page was partly visible beneath the contract. At the top was the name of a senior living community 20 miles away. Maple Haven. Margaret reached for the page. Melissa covered it with her hand. "That is only a backup plan." Margaret stared at her. "You told me I would have a room in your new house." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "We were considering several options. You already chose one." The silence answered for him. Margaret took out her phone and photographed the visible portion of the page. Pamela began placing her stamp and papers into her bag. "I am not completing another notarization today," she said. Melissa's face tightened. "We have a deadline." Pamela stood. "You also have a disputed signature." Eric closed his file. "Until the title company clears this, the buyer will not proceed." He handed Margaret his business card and left with Pamela. The front door closed. For several seconds, only the kitchen clock made a sound. Then Daniel turned toward Margaret. "You just put all of us at risk." Margaret looked at him. "This is my house." Melissa stepped closer. "For now." Daniel pulled a folded appointment card from his pocket. "We scheduled an evaluation for Monday," he said. "A doctor needs to determine whether you can still manage decisions like this." Margaret felt the betrayal settle deeper. They had failed to take her home with a signature. Now they intended to take it by questioning her mind. Margaret picked up the appointment card. "I'll go," she said. Daniel looked surprised. Melissa recovered first. "Good. Then a doctor can explain why this house is no longer safe for you." Margaret slipped the card into her pocket. Neither of them noticed that she had already photographed it. An hour later, Daniel and Melissa left to meet their real estate agent. Margaret locked the front door behind them. Then she called Rachel Monroe. When Margaret explained the medical evaluation, Rachel's voice sharpened. "Do not attend an appointment arranged by someone trying to control your property." Rachel gave her the number of Julia Mercer, an attorney who handled elder law and property disputes. Julia answered on the second ring. After hearing the story, she asked Margaret one question. "Do you have a doctor who has treated you for several years?" "Yes." Dr. Patel. Call that office yourself. Ask for an independent appointment. Go without Daniel or Melissa. Dr. Patel saw Margaret that afternoon. A cancellation had opened a 30-minute appointment. Before the examination began, his nurse closed the door. Your son called us last week, she said. Margaret felt cold. What did he want? He said you were forgetting appointments and making unsafe financial decisions. He asked whether the doctor would sign a statement. Did he? No. Your son is not authorized to request that. Dr. Patel reviewed Margaret's medications. He asked about her bills, the date, her address, and recent events. Margaret explained the forged authorization, the house contract, and the threat to remove her from the property. She answered every question clearly. At the end, Dr. Patel signed a letter stating that Margaret was fully capable of managing her personal, financial, and legal decisions. She carried that letter directly to Julia Mercer's office. Julia spread the documents across a conference table. The original deed. Walter's letter. The questionable power of attorney. Daniel's message. And the photograph of the Maple Haven page. Julia studied the senior community's name. Did you authorize an application? No. Julia turned the telephone toward Margaret. Call them yourself. Confirm your identity. A Maple Haven admissions coordinator found Margaret's file within minutes. A private room had been reserved in her name. The move-in date was 2 days after the scheduled closing. Daniel was listed as her emergency contact. Melissa was listed as the person authorized to manage the move. Margaret gripped the edge of the table. What address is listed as my future residence? There was a pause. Maple Haven, the coordinator said. Not my son's new house? No, ma'am. Margaret ended the call. The promised bedroom had never existed. Julia looked at the closing date again. They were not planning to move you in with them. Margaret folded Dr. Patel's letter and placed it beside the deed. No, she said quietly. They were planning to move me out of their way. Julia did not speak for several seconds. Then she pulled the house contract closer. Margaret, we know what they plan to do with you. Now we need to know what they plan to do with the money. She called Rachel at the title company and placed the phone on speaker. Rachel had already frozen the file. No closing could move forward until Margaret's ownership and signature were verified. But the payment instructions had been submitted 2 days earlier. Rachel emailed them while Margaret waited. Julia opened the document. The sale proceeds were not scheduled to go into Margaret's checking account. They were to be wired into a newly opened account called the Carter Family Transition Fund. Daniel was listed as the account manager. Margaret had never heard of it. Julia pointed to another page. After the mortgage and closing costs, nearly $500,000 would remain. The instructions gave Daniel authority to use that money for Margaret's housing, care, and relocation. There was no limit. No monthly budget. No requirement that he report how the money was spent. Margaret looked at the words. They were going to control everything. Julia nodded. And there's more. Rachel had also received a copy of Daniel and Melissa's purchase contract for a new house. The price was $785,000. They had already paid $45,000 in earnest money. The purchase depended on funds from Margaret's sale. If her house did not close on time, they could lose the deposit. Margaret finally understood the urgency. The pressure at the kitchen table. The threat about the bedroom. The doctor's appointment. The room at Maple Haven. Daniel and Melissa had already committed money they did not have. They were counting on her home to rescue them. Julia folded her hands. We can notify them today that the sale is frozen. Margaret looked at the copies spread across the table. If they know we found this, they'll say it was all for my benefit. They may. Then I want them to explain it themselves. Julia studied her. What are you thinking? Margaret picked up her phone. Every Sunday, her 2 daughters, Daniel, and several grandchildren came to the house for dinner. Melissa had already sent a family message saying Margaret was becoming confused and emotional. Margaret typed a reply. I would like everyone here Sunday at 4. Daniel and Melissa can explain the move, the house sale, and where I will be living. Daniel answered less than a minute later. That's a good idea, Mom. Once everyone hears the plan, you'll feel better. Margaret showed the message to Julia. He still thinks I don't understand. Julia began organizing the evidence. Before Margaret left, her phone rang. It was the coordinator from Maple Haven. I found one more document in your application, she said. It says you requested permanent placement because you no longer trust yourself to live alone. Margaret's voice stayed steady. Did I sign it? The coordinator hesitated. Yes, ma'am. Another signature had appeared in Margaret's name. And this time, Daniel had signed beneath it as the witness. At 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, every chair around Margaret's dining table was filled. Her daughters, Linda and Joanne, sat near the window. 3 grandchildren stood along the wall. Daniel and Melissa had placed a folder at each seat. On the front was a printed title. Margaret's Safe Transition Plan. Melissa began speaking before Margaret could sit down. We all love her, she said. But love also means making difficult decisions. Daniel nodded. He explained that the house was too large. The stairs were unsafe. The yard required too much work. Then he said Margaret had already agreed to move into Maple Haven until a room became available in their new home. Linda looked at him. You told us Mom was moving with you. That is still the goal, Daniel said. Margaret folded her hands on the table. When will that room be available? Melissa answered quickly. Once we finish the lower level. There is no finished lower level on the purchase contract. Melissa's face changed. Only slightly. But Margaret saw it. Joanne turned toward her mother. What purchase contract? Margaret opened Walter's canvas document pouch. She placed the new house contract in the center of the table. Then the Maple Haven reservation. Then the payment instructions for the Carter Family Transition Fund. No one spoke. Margaret looked at Daniel. Tell them who controls that account. Daniel leaned back. It was created to manage your expenses. That was not my question. His jaw tightened. I was listed as manager. And how much of my money would have gone into it? Daniel did not answer. Margaret did. Almost $500,000. One of the grandchildren looked down at the floor. Linda picked up the Maple Haven form. Mom's signature is on this. It is not mine, Margaret said. Melissa stood. This is exactly why we arranged an evaluation. She signs documents, then forgets. Margaret placed Dr. Patel's letter beside the application. My own doctor examined me Friday. He confirmed that I can manage my legal and financial decisions. Melissa stared at the letter. Daniel looked toward the hallway, as though calculating how quickly he could end the meeting. Joanne turned to him. Did you tell her doctor she was confused? I raised concerns. You tried to get him to sign a statement, Margaret said. Daniel pushed back his chair. We were protecting you. No, Margaret replied. You were protecting the house you already agreed to buy. The room grew quiet again. Then Melissa reached into her purse. She removed her phone. You keep saying Margaret never agreed, she said. But we have proof. She opened an audio file and placed the phone on the table. Margaret heard her own voice. Clear and unmistakable. Yes, Daniel. Do whatever you think is best. I trust you. Several relatives turned toward her. Margaret remembered saying those words. But not about selling her home. Melissa stopped the recording before the next sentence could play. Margaret looked at the phone. Play the rest. Melissa picked it up. That is all anyone needs to hear. And in that moment, Margaret understood. They had not only forged her name. They had been collecting her words. Linda reached for her own phone. "Melissa sent that recording to us this morning," she said. She said it proved Mom had agreed. Melissa's face tightened. "Linda, don't." But Linda had already opened the file. She moved the playback bar backward. Daniel's voice came through first. "Mom, the back porch contractor needs an answer. Do you want me to handle it?" Then Margaret heard herself. "Yes, Daniel. Do whatever you think is best. I trust you." The recording continued. "But only for the porch repairs. You do not have permission to sell this house or sign anything in my name." Linda stopped the audio. No one moved. Margaret looked at Melissa. "You removed the sentence that explained everything." Melissa folded her arms. "We shortened it. You changed its meaning." Daniel looked at the table. Margaret could see the moment he understood that silence would no longer protect him. Joanne opened one of the folders Melissa had placed at each chair. A loose page slipped onto the floor. She picked it up. "What is this?" Daniel stood too quickly. "Give me that." Joanne stepped back and read the heading. It was a mortgage gift letter. The document claimed Margaret had agreed to give Daniel and Melissa $320,000 toward the purchase of their new home. The money was described as a gift. Not a loan. Not support for Margaret's care. A gift that would never be repaid. Margaret's false signature appeared at the bottom. Daniel's name was beneath it. Witness. Linda stared at her brother. "You signed this?" Daniel looked at Melissa. She said the lender needed proof that the money was available. Margaret's voice remained quiet. "Did you see me sign it?" "No." "Did I ever tell you I was giving you $320,000? Daniel said nothing. Melissa reached for the page. "This is private financial information." Margaret placed her hand over it. "It came from the sale of my private home." One of the grandchildren left the wall and moved closer to Margaret. The small gesture mattered. For days, Daniel and Melissa had tried to make her appear confused and alone. Now the family could see the plan in their own paperwork. Margaret photographed the gift letter and sent it to Julia. Then she placed the original beside the forged Maple Haven application. Daniel lowered his voice. "Mom, we can still fix this inside the family. You had 6 weeks to speak to me inside the family." Her phone rang. Julia's name appeared on the screen. Margaret answered and placed the call on speaker. Julia had reviewed the photograph. "This gift letter changes the situation," she said. "It shows they intended to convert your sale proceeds into their personal property." Melissa went pale. Margaret looked around the table. The promised bedroom had been a lie. The care fund had been a disguise. And her son had witnessed the document designed to take the money from her home. Julia's voice remained on speaker. "Margaret, do not let anyone remove those documents from the table." Melissa reached for the gift letter anyway. Linda covered it with her hand. "Leave it there." Daniel looked around the room. His sisters were no longer avoiding his eyes. Neither were his children. "We could lose $45,000, he said. "That deposit was our savings." Margaret looked at him. "You committed that money before you had the right to sell my house. We thought you would agree. You thought I would be afraid." The doorbell rang. Everyone turned toward the hallway. A man wearing a blue work shirt stood on the porch with a clipboard. "I'm here to confirm tomorrow's cleanout," he said. Margaret stepped outside. "What cleanout?" He checked the work order. "Full house staging removal. Furniture, personal items, basement storage, and garage contents." Daniel appeared behind her. "There's been a misunderstanding." The man looked between them. "The order says the resident is relocating to Maple Haven. The crew is scheduled for 8 tomorrow morning." Margaret felt every person in the dining room listening. When was this booked? Last Tuesday. By whom? The man turned the clipboard slightly. Daniel Carter. Margaret photographed the work order. Then she showed the man her driver's license and the certified copy of the deed on her phone. I own this property. I am not moving. Cancel the job. He nodded immediately. I'll mark the order disputed. No crew will enter without written approval from the legal owner. After he left, Margaret closed the front door. Daniel's face had lost its color. Melissa spoke first. We were preparing the house for the buyer. That is normal. You scheduled strangers to remove 40 years of my belongings, Margaret said. Before I signed anything. Daniel lowered his voice. Mom, please. We can still work this out. Margaret looked toward the guest room hallway. Yes. You can begin by packing your own things. Melissa stared at her. You're asking us to leave? You told me my room depended on whether I cooperated. Margaret placed the forged gift letter into Walter's canvas pouch. Tonight, your room depends on whether I can trust you. Daniel looked toward Linda and Joanne. Neither defended him. Within an hour, he and Melissa carried their suitcases to the car. Linda stayed with Margaret. Joanne changed the alarm code and collected every spare key she could find. At 8:30, Julia called again. The title company and Daniel's mortgage lender had scheduled a joint meeting for 9 the next morning. They wanted the original deed. The disputed signatures. The full audio recording. And an explanation from every person involved. Margaret watched Daniel's taillights disappear at the end of the street. For 6 weeks, he had controlled the story. Tomorrow, he would have to explain it in a room where no one depended on him for the truth. At 9 o'clock Monday morning, Margaret entered the title company's conference room with Julia beside her. Daniel and Melissa were already seated. So were Rachel Monroe, Pamela Reeves, the buyer's representative, and a loan officer from Daniel's mortgage company. A recorder sat in the center of the table. Rachel began. This meeting concerns disputed ownership documents, a questioned power of attorney, and funds connected to 2 property transactions. Margaret placed Walter's canvas pouch in front of her. Daniel looked at it. He knew what was inside. The loan officer turned to him. Mr. Carter, did your mother authorize the $320,000 gift? Daniel glanced at Melissa. We believed she had. That was not the question. Daniel swallowed. No. She did not sign it in front of me. The room became still. Rachel opened the power of attorney form. Pamela, did you personally verify Mrs. Carter's identity? Pamela lowered her eyes. The video connection was poor. Daniel provided the identification copy. Was Mrs. Carter visible? Not clearly. Margaret spoke. I was never on that call. Pamela removed her notary journal from her bag. The entry listed a remote meeting at 3:15 on Margaret's birthday. Margaret opened her phone. At 3:15, I was at a restaurant with Daniel and Melissa. She played the full audio recording. Daniel's question about the porch contractor came first. Then Margaret's answer. Yes, Daniel. Do whatever you think is best. I trust you. The recording continued. But only for the porch repairs. You do not have permission to sell this house or sign anything in my name. Melissa shifted in her chair. Julia placed the shortened version beside the full recording. You removed the limiting sentence before sending the clip to family members. Melissa's voice became defensive. We were trying to show that Margaret trusted Daniel. You were trying to make trust sound like consent, Margaret said. Then she opened Walter's pouch. The original deed went onto the table. Her title policy. Dr. Patel's letter. The Maple Haven application. The clean-out order. And Walter's final letter. Rachel read the ownership line aloud. Margaret Elaine Carter. Sole owner. The buyer's representative closed his folder. The purchase contract cannot proceed. The loan officer followed. Without verified gift funds, Daniel and Melissa's mortgage approval is withdrawn. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, please. We made a mistake. Margaret looked at him. A mistake is forgetting to call. She touched the forged documents. This required appointments, signatures, a moving company, and a place to put me. Daniel had no answer. Rachel marked the sale file cancelled. Pamela's notarization was placed under formal review. Every disputed document would be preserved. Then Margaret turned to her son. You told me signing would make everything easier. She gathered the deed and Walter's letter. You were right. She stood. Not signing made the truth easier to see. Daniel followed Margaret into the parking lot. Mom, wait. She stopped beside Julia's car. Melissa remained near the building entrance, speaking urgently into her phone. Daniel looked smaller without the conference table between them. We lost the new house, he said. Margaret held Walter's canvas pouch against her side. You were willing to make me lose mine. Daniel lowered his eyes. I thought we could take care of you and fix our finances at the same time. You reserved a room at Maple Haven. Melissa thought it would only be temporary. Margaret looked toward her daughter-in-law. Melissa turned away. Daniel continued. We got ahead of ourselves. The deposit was already paid. Then everything became urgent. No, Margaret said. The money became urgent. I became convenient. He had no answer. Julia stepped closer. The title company has cancelled the sale. Margaret's ownership record will also receive a fraud alert. No future transaction can proceed without direct identity verification. Daniel looked alarmed. What happens to us? That depends on the document review, Julia said. But you will not control your mother's property, accounts, medical information, or housing decisions. Margaret opened her purse. She removed the spare house key Daniel had carried since college. Give me the other copies. Mom. Every key. He slowly removed one from his key ring. Melissa crossed the parking lot and handed Margaret another. Her expression was tight. We never wanted you to be homeless. Margaret met her eyes. You used the threat of homelessness to make me sign. Melissa looked away first. That afternoon, Linda and Joanne helped Margaret change the locks. They removed Daniel from every emergency contact form. Julia prepared a written revocation of the false power of attorney and notified Maple Haven that Margaret had never requested placement. By evening, the house was quiet again. No folders on the kitchen table. No packed boxes in the hallway. No strangers measuring rooms that still belonged to her. Margaret walked into Walter's workshop and opened the safe. She returned the original deed to its protective sleeve. Then she unfolded his letter. There was one paragraph she had not fully understood the night before. A house can become too large, Walter had written. One day, you may choose to leave it. But the choice must be yours, made without fear and without anyone standing over your shoulder. Margaret sat at his workbench. She had spent 2 days proving that she could keep the house. Now she understood something else. Keeping it did not mean she had to live exactly as she had before. The next morning, she called a contractor. Not a real estate agent. She asked for an estimate to add a first-floor bedroom and a safer handrail to the porch. Then she placed the unsigned sale contract into the shredder. The house would change. But it would change for Margaret. Not because Daniel and Melissa had decided she no longer belonged there. 3 months after the title meeting, Daniel's car stopped at the curb. Margaret saw him through the front window. He came alone. He carried no folders. No contracts. No key. Margaret met him on the porch but did not open the front door. I'm not asking to come inside, Daniel said. She waited. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a written apology. Daniel admitted that fear about money had turned into entitlement. He admitted that he had allowed Melissa to speak for him because staying silent felt easier than telling her no. Most importantly, he admitted that none of it could have happened without his cooperation. Margaret finished reading and folded the letter once. "An apology does not restore trust," she said. "I know. And being my son does not give you access to my home, my money, or my decisions." Daniel looked down and took one slow breath. "I know that now." Margaret studied him. She did not invite him inside. But she did not tear up the letter. "Come back next Sunday," she said. "We can sit on the porch for 20 minutes." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." He did not step closer. By the 6th month, Margaret's first-floor bedroom was finished. It had wide doorways, a comfortable reading chair, and a window facing Walter's maple tree. A safer handrail ran along the front porch. The basement stairs had brighter lighting. The house still held 40 years of memories. But now it also supported the life Margaret was living today. Linda and Joanne helped with the renovations. The grandchildren came on Saturdays to paint, carry boxes, and hang Walter's old photographs. Every invoice came directly to Margaret. Every decision required her approval. Daniel continued visiting on Sundays. At first, he stayed for 20 minutes. Later, Margaret allowed him to remain for coffee. She still did not return his key. Some relationships, she understood, had to be rebuilt without access. One evening, the family gathered for dinner again. Margaret sat at the head of the table. No contract waited beside her plate. No one told her where she would live. Before dessert, she placed Walter's brass key inside a small wooden frame and hung it near the kitchen door. Not as a reminder of what Daniel had tried to take. As proof that Walter had protected her right to choose. "I'm Eleanor Brooks." Margaret kept her home, but more importantly, she kept control of her future. Do you think she was right to let Daniel slowly rebuild the relationship? Or would you have kept that door closed for good? Share your thoughts in the comments.